Welcome everyone to our webinar on raptor identification, just in time for spring migration as we have our raptors return to Tucson. My name is Kirsten Howe. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator at Tucson Audubon. I'm excited to be here today and grateful for all of you. I'm also excited to introduce our speaker, Steve Vaughan. So Steve is a professional photographer and ornithologist. He has been photographing and studying natural history for more than 40 years. His photographs have been published in numerous books, magazines, and calendars from publications including National Geographic, Audubon, National Wildlife, Sierra Club, and Arizona Highways. We're also very lucky that he helps us out with our field trip program, leading some of our field trips, and in general is just an awesome supporter of Tucson Audubon. So we're really grateful for him and for his expertise today talking about raptors and identifying different raptors. I'm excited. I know I could use help with raptor identification. I'm sure that's why you're all here as well. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Steve Vaughan. Please take it away.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and bring that up. So first, what I want to tell you is you're not going to be able to identify them all. No matter how good you are, there's going to be some that you look at and go, wow, I don't know. And don't be afraid to say that. The other thing is you will misidentify lots of raptors. I led a field trip, this was years ago, but I led a field trip with 4 other very experienced raptor guys. And we were all looking at the same bird, and we all 4 came up with a different ID, and we were all 4 wrong. So there you go. So the first thing I try to tell you to do is when you're out there and you see something, you're trying to identify it, stop trying to identify it and just look at it. What do you see? So I'm going to use this photo here as an example. What do you see? I'm not going to tell you what it is now. We'll get to that towards the end. But it's just one of those things, because a lot of times when you see something, you only get a fraction of a second to see it, and then it's gone. So if you're sitting there the whole time you're looking at it and going, God, I wonder what that is. I wonder what that is. I wonder what that is. You're not thinking about, what do I see? So try to make that your first thing is always, what do I see? The second thing is don't be fooled by size. You know, when I'm in the field, there's so many times I see people see a bird flying overhead and they go, wow, that's really big, or it's really small. And it's like, well, when it's in the air, what are you comparing it to? There is no sense of scale. Which of these 2 birds is bigger? Right? The one on the left looks bigger, but it's also quite close. The one on the right's a bald eagle, the one on the left's a peregrine falcon. The bald eagle's twice the size of the falcon, but it looks smaller. So when their birds are in the air, don't even think about how big or small it is. Just look at the proportions. What do the wings look like? How long are the wings? How's it flying? What's it doing? What do you see? What is it that I'm seeing? Come on. What's going on? It's not forwarding.
You can try using that little,
There,
you got it.
There it goes. All right. So when you have a sense of scale, when something's sitting on a telephone pole or a fence post or something, now you have a sense of scale. The one on the right is bigger than the one on the left, and indeed it is. The one on the right's a golden eagle. The one on the left is a bald eagle. I'm sorry, a rough-legged hawk. So you do have a sense of scale now. So, okay, now you can say it's a big bird or it's a small bird. And then the next thing I always try to talk about are, what are the odds? What are you expecting to see wherever it is you are? Here in Tucson, probably the 2 most common raptors we expect to see are red-tailed hawks and Cooper's hawks. The odds are, if you see a bird shooting through your backyard, the odds are it's a Cooper's hawk. It doesn't mean that is what it is, but the odds are pretty high. If you see a bird soaring over the open areas around Tucson, the odds are it's a red-tailed hawk. So my suggestion is get really comfortable and really knowledgeable with the ones that are common, the ones you expect to see. Because once you get good with those, when you see something that looks different, then it's like, okay, That's not a Cooper's hawk. That's not a red-tailed hawk. Again, when you see a big dark bird soaring over the Tucson area, the odds are it's a turkey vulture. But the second odd, the other one that could very easily be, is a Harris's hawk. But I would say the odds of it being a turkey vulture are probably 75 to 80% of the time here in Tucson. Harris's hawk might be 20. So the odds, again, of you seeing these two are pretty good. So then the next thing you want to think about is not just what do you see, what's it shaped like? What group does it fall within? Is it an eagle? So eagles are very large-bodied, heavy-bodied birds, very long wings, very labored flight. So when they're flapping, it's very labored. When they're soaring, they soar very well, but when they're flapping, they're working because they're a very heavy bird. Vultures are also pretty common here in the area. They fly very differently. They're more buoyant in flight. Eagles, when they're flying, they're very steady, even in heavy winds. Vultures can get blown around a bit in the wind. So they are a little bit different. The next one would be an osprey. The odds of an osprey in the Tucson area, if you're not around water, are pretty slim. Ospreys are virtually always going to be found around water. Okay. They have very long, narrow wings. We'll talk a little bit more about it. We're just going to go through groups for now. Then the bootios, the soaring hawks that are also very common in the area. Long, broad wings, short tail. Kites, we don't typically see kites in Tucson, but we do have them in the southeast area. They look and they're shaped like a falcon, but they don't fly like a falcon. They're very buoyant, very, they get bounced around in the wind. Then you come to the falcons. Falcons, with the exception of a kestrel, when you see a falcon flying, it's rarely soaring and it's always going somewhere, I guess is the best way I put it. Falcons always look like they're on a mission. They're going somewhere. Again, very pointed wings, relatively long tails. The next one would be the accipiters. These are the ones that are going to be the hardest to identify. So we'll spend a little bit of time on those. They have relatively short, broad wings and a long tail. They're designed to be in the forest. Here in Tucson, we have them all around town, which is a little unusual, but they evolved as a forest species. And then the northern harriers, and there's only one species of harrier in the US, the northern harrier. And they typically soar low over the ground and they fly with their wings held in a V, like you can see in that photo on the lower right. Okay, so what do I see and what group do I think it's going to fall in? Those are your first two questions. Okay, then we'll talk about a little bit more with the bootios. So I'm going to divide the bootios in what I would call the grassland or traditional bootios, and then I'll talk about the Southwest specialties. So the more traditional bootios, the ones you're going to find around the grasslands, the only one that's really typical in the Tucson specifically is the red-tailed hawk. If you look at the red-tailed hawk, it has a dark head, a light breast, and a dark belly. They're not all quite this distinct, but that is very typical of a red-tailed hawk. I call it dark, light, dark. Dark head, light breast, dark belly. Sometimes the belly band's not very distinct, but typically you'll see some banding on the belly on a typical red-tailed hawk. The other raptor that's fairly common in the areas surrounding Tucson, not so much in Tucson proper, but when you get in the more open areas, are the Swainson's hawk. So the lower left. And if you look at it, it has a dark head, a dark breast, and a light belly. So it's a dark, dark, light bird. They're fairly common on the grasslands, but they're not really very common in Southeast Arizona. Another one, the one in the top right, is the ferruginous hawk. It has a light head, a light breast, and a light belly. This one actually has a little bit of a belly band, but most typically this will be almost a pure white belly. So when you see these birds out there, they just look like a big white raptor, almost like an albino or a leucistic bird. The red-tailed hawks are found here year-round. Swainson's hawks are going to be here in the summer. They're not going to be here in the winter, should not be here in the winter. Ferruginous hawks are going to be, they can be here year-round. They'll be more common in the winter, but they would be pretty uncommon in Southeast Arizona. And then the rough-legged hawk, the one down here on the lower right, has a light head, light breast, and a dark belly, a light, light, dark. And these patterns you can see at a very, very long distance. So they really kind of help you narrow down what you're looking at. And again, the other problem with raptors, well, bootios in general, especially these four, they will come from everything from a very dark chocolate, almost black bird to a very, very pale individual. And that's the way they'll be throughout their life. So the ones I kind of put up as examples are kind of the more typical examples. When you look at the back of these birds, the red-tailed hawk has a very, very distinct, what I call a V on the back. Pretty much in all plumages and all age groups. So this red-tailed hawk, if you notice, doesn't have a red tail. This is a juvenile Harlan's red tail, but it does have the white V on the back. So very distinct. You're driving down the highway, you see a hawk sitting on a telephone pole, you see its back, you see the V, that's a red tail. Swainson's hawks are very dark backed, and at a distance you pretty much see no patterning. You just see a dark bird. And then the two over here, the ferruginous hawk has a mottled back, but it has a rusty color to it. And if you notice on this bird, it also has a red tail. Not a brick red tail like a red tail, but it has a rusty red tail, or it can have a red tail as an adult. The ferruginous hawk has a mottled back, but it's more gray. Doesn't have this rufous coloration. Again, they're pretty unusual to find them here, and they're going to be winter only. In flight, they're also pretty distinct. The red-tailed hawk has what I call a comma at the wrist and a dash in the leading edge of the wing. A comma and a dash. Doesn't matter what the tail looks like. If you see that comma and a dash, you've got a red tail. If you see a dash and no comma, or you see the comma and no dash, it's a ferruginous hawk. Typical ferruginous hawks are very, very pale in this patagium area, this fleshy portion of the wing. And ferruginous red tails or ferruginous hawks can have a white tail or can have a rusty tail, as we saw in the other one. The Swainson's hawk down here in the lower left, which is very distinct because its flight feathers are dark, different than everything else with the exception of some of the desert Southwest species. So it's got a reverse underwing pattern where the flight feathers are dark and the patagium is light. And again, you can see the dark, light, dark. The rough-legged hawk has these distinct wrist patches, very, very distinct. And even if you've got darker versions of these birds, these patterns still pretty well hold up. One thing I try to tell people when you're looking at bootios, get familiar with the red tails because they are what I call a typical bootio. When you start looking at the others, they look different than a red tail. A Swainson's hawk actually has longer, narrower wings than a red tail, almost falcon-like, but not quite falcon-like, but they don't have, the red tails just look like a generic hawk. And again, this will look more like a falcon. The ferruginous hawk has really narrow primaries here, and then it bulges where the secondaries are. So again, it's very different than the steady pattern that you get on a red tail. And then the rough-legged hawk, well, also talk about flight. These fly very heavy. They flap they're a heavy body bird, much heavier than a red tail. So when they flap, it's very labored. Swainson's hawks have a very quick wing beat, almost like a falcon. And rough-legged hawks are very buoyant in flight. They get blown around in the wind. They also have what I call a double dihedral. Their wing pattern is, it's an M when you're looking at them flying at you, where a turkey vulture and harriers I talked about have a V pattern. The rough-legged hawk will have an M pattern. So the wrists kind of go up at the wrist. So talk about the red tails again a little bit more. The adult red tail will have a brick red tail. Juvenile red tails will have a banded tail like this. You can still see the V on the back of this red tail. Again, typical dark, light, dark. This belly band can vary significantly from individuals. Again, dash, comma. This is an adult, you can see the red tail. This is a juvenile. Again, you can see the dash and the comma, the juvenile tail with the banding. And this is a dark phase red tail. So you can still see the comma. The dash is there. It's just difficult to see in this photograph. So again, get as familiar as you can with the red tails because they're the ones you should expect to see. Again, some more examples of red tail. Another dark phase red tail, but you can actually see the dark head, light breast, and dark belly on this. And then there's the brick red tail. Again, V pattern on the back. A juvenile, this is more of a typical juvenile with a brown, a light brown and dark brown tail. Another juvenile kind of displaying its tail for you. Again, a couple different versions of the red tail. Again, a dark phase. So just get as familiar as you can and expect to see them. Okay, the ferruginous hawks. One unique thing about the ferruginous hawk, there's only 2 bootios in North America that have legs feathered to the foot. The ferruginous hawk and the rough-legged hawk. So if you see a hawk that has feathered tarsus all the way down to the foot, you narrowed it down to 2. Every other hawk is going to have a bare tarsus. Okay. The other kind of cool thing when you see the upper wing of a ferruginous hawk, it's very pale up here on the primaries, very distinct. And again, there's your rusty red tail. It certainly is not a red tail, but it's a rusty tail. The ferruginous name comes from this ferruginous rusty color that they have. Swainson's hawks, a couple more examples of Swainson's hawks. Again, there's a dark face Swainson's hawk, but again, with the dark primaries and secondaries, if it's one of these 4, it's going to be a Swainson's hawk. I will tell you something, my email will be at the end of this. If you send me an email, I can send you a PDF of this so you don't have to take a bunch of notes. I just saw someone taking a picture, so it just made me think of that. So if you want a copy of this, I'd be glad to send it to you. Just drop me an email. And Kristen said they're going to be recording it as well. There you go. So Swainson's can kind of have, sometimes they'll have a darker breast. This is a juvenile Swainson, so it really doesn't have the dark bib that you're going to find on a typical. And this is another juvenile, so the bib is just starting to come in. Then we have what I call our Southwest bootios. These are the ones that you don't get in other parts of the country. The zone-tailed hawk, the common black hawk, and the gray hawk, these 3 you're not typically going to find in Tucson proper. Typically, all 3 are going to be found in riparian areas, not out in the open. They're not going to be in the desert per se. They're going to be in riparian areas. The Harris's hawk's the exception. The Harris's hawk down here in the bottom right is going to be found in the desert, anywhere around Tucson. They're very common in the mesquite bosques. and they're fairly common. The other three are actually fairly uncommon, so you almost have to go looking for them. Both zone tails and gray hawks can be found down in the Patagonia area. You can see both of those actually in Patton Center, Tucson Audubon's property down there. Black hawks, they're going to be typically a little bit higher elevation than these two. And then the Harris's hawk is also very unique with this rusty wing and this bold white terminal band. Very, very distinct when you see them fly. In flight, again, very distinct. Rufous under the wing and this white band, and then the terminal white band. Very, very common. The other thing that's unique about the Harris's hawk is it's actually not a true buteo. It's a separate genus. Its tail is much longer than the other buteos, so they look very different. These two are a little bit more difficult to separate, but they're shaped very differently. This common black hawk here in the upper right has a very, very broad wing and a very short tail. Once you've seen a couple of these, you will never mistake those for anything else. There's not another buteo out there that looks anything like this. Very, very unique. The zone tail hawk, upper left, it's kind of unique in that when you see them soaring, they look like a turkey vulture. They mimic turkey vultures. And at a distance, they look like turkey vultures. When you look at that photo there, you think, oh, it's easy to separate that from a turkey vulture. I'll tell you what, in the field, it's not. When you're out there in the field and you see them and they're soaring, a lot of times that tail's folded in and this white band that you see here isn't very distinct. They look identical to a turkey vulture when they're up there soaring. You have to look really closely. Obviously, they don't have the bare head of a turkey vulture, but again, at heights, you sometimes can't make that out. They are slightly different, and I'll talk about this again when I get to turkey vultures. Their tail shape is a little bit different, but it's very, very difficult to see at a distance. The gray hawk is, again, it's pretty unique. It doesn't look like anything else. It's a gray hawk. And again, pretty common down there in the Patagonia area, along the riparian areas. The juveniles look kind of like the adults with the exception of the gray hawk. They just look like a modeled adult. So when you see them, you go, oh yeah, that looks like a zone tail, or yeah, that looks like a black hawk or a Harris's hawk. Again, look how broad that wing is. This is a very, very unique shaped bird. The juvenile gray hawks don't look like anything else. You just have to see some of them to get used to them, but that's what a juvenile gray hawk looks like. Come on, there. Again, talk about the Harris hawk a little bit more because they are fairly common here in the Tucson area. The other thing, if you're driving along and you see like 6 or 7, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or more birds perched together, raptors like this, the odds are, if it's a buteo, it's going to be a Harris's hawk. You may see a pair of red tails or a pair of gray hawks or a pair of zone tails sitting together, but you'll rarely, if ever, see what I would call a flock of raptors sitting together, with the exception of Harris's hawks and turkey vultures. Turkey vultures and black vultures. So there's 7 Harris's hawks sitting on this telephone pole here. So again, that's something very unique. They also hunt in groups. They hunt like wolves. They're pack hunters. So very, very unique birds. Again, a couple more examples. Very, very distinct. Once you've seen a couple of these, you're not going to mistake them for much of anything else. So we just kind of went through the buteos, and now we're going to talk about the accipiters. The buteos and accipiters are very different. They're designed for different purposes. Buteos are designed to soar. They're designed for being in the open country. long, broad wings, short tails. They're not really designed for maneuvering, although they can maneuver quite well. They're designed for the open country. The accipiters, on the other hand, are designed for dense vegetation, flying through trees, very short, broad wings. They accelerate really, really quickly. They have long, broad, long tails that they can flare. I mean, they can shoot through openings that they can shoot through an opening that's only 6 or 8 inches wide. They'll come shooting through, they close their wings, shoot through, and then open the wings on the other side. They're incredible to watch. So all the accipiters will do that. So there's 3 accipiters. And what I will tell you is they're hard. No matter how good you are going to be out in the field debating with other birders on whether it's a sharp-shinned Cooper's or possibly a goshawk. In Tucson, your odds are it's a Cooper's hawk. 99.9% of the ones you see here in the summer are going to be at Cooper's hawks. The odds of you seeing a sharp-shinned hawk in Tucson outside of the migration and winter are pretty slim. Same thing with the northern goshawk. The odds of you seeing a northern goshawk in Tucson proper are pretty slim, period. Okay, so the odds of you seeing a goshawk are pretty slim. So if you see a gray hawk and you think it's a goshawk, consider gray hawk before you consider goshawk. But again, look how long that tail is, very distinct than the gray hawk we saw earlier. So again, these two are sharp-shinned and Coopers are very, very difficult. Now I'll show you a couple things and you can see in these 2 photographs. The sharp-shinned hawk's tail, all the tail feathers are the same length. It's a square tail. The Cooper's hawk, the outer tail feathers are shorter than the inner tail feathers. So you can see this feather here is shorter than this feather here. That gives it that rounded tail look when you see them flying. If you can get an undertail view of the hawk, you can see this. If you see a square tail or a rounded tail or the different tail lengths, feather lengths, you can pretty much say you've got one or the other. The only exception is when they're molting. So sometimes a sharp-shinned hawk, this tail feather could be short because it's molting that feather in, it's just not fully grown. So almost any time you give these, this is what it is. If you see this, there's going to be exceptions. Okay. The goshawk in the adult is gray and it has a very distinct eyebrow, white eyebrow. The other thing that kind of separates the 2 species, you can sort of see it here. A Cooper's hawk as an adult has a black cap and a gray back. And I'll show you a view of the back. It also has a pale collar separating these 2 in the adults. The sharp-shinned hawk has a gray or gray-brown cap and a gray-brown back, but it's continuous from the cap to the back. There's no break, there's no collar, light collar in the juveniles or in the adults. In flight, they also fly differently. There's a scale going from the sharp-shinned being the smallest to the goshawk being the largest. And in most raptors, the females are larger than the males. So the sharp-shinned male is the smallest. The sharp-shinned female is the next one up. The Cooper's male is the next one up. The Cooper's female is next. The northern goshawk male is next. And then the female goshawk is the largest. So it's a continuum from small to large. The problem, again, going back to size, especially in these birds, is there is an overlap between a large female sharp-shinned and a small male Cooper's hawk. So you can't use size to distinguish them. Same thing with the goshawk. A large female Cooper's hawk can be as large as a small male goshawk. So that overlap is there. So I always caution to use size as a reference. They also fly very differently. The sharpshin is a small, light bird. It's probably the size of a robin. So you think, oh, well, I'll be able to tell that from a Cooper's hawk. Yeah, not so much when they're in the field, when they're flying by or when they're perched. But when they're flying, they get blown around in the wind. And their wing beats are very, very shallow and very rapid. The other thing that is typical on a sharpshin is this leading edge of the wing is in line with the front of the head. Okay, they hold that, they hold the wrists forward, where the Cooper's hawk, it's a little bit heavier bird. It holds that wings out further. It needs more lift. So the head typically sticks out in front of the wrist. Okay, typically, if it's breezy and it's bouncing around in the wind, it will bring those wings forward. But if you kind of see them typically when they're soaring, you see that that wing is held very flat. The other thing, and it's subtle, the tail on a Cooper's hawk is longer proportionally than a sharpshin. You got to see a lot of them to get that. The other thing, at this time of year, during the breeding season, Cooper's hawks will flare these undertail coverts. So these white feathers you're seeing here, they flare them out as part of their courtship display. The undertail coverts on a Cooper's hawk are more distinct and more visible than they are in a sharpshin. Sharpshin hawks will do this, but you will never see, it almost looks like their legs sticking out, these white legs sticking out. Sharpshin hawks will do it, but it's nowhere near as, look how far those undertail coverts are extending. Look at them on the sharpshin. They may flare them out, but it'll never look like that. Okay. Then the goshawk, it is a really heavy bodied bird. They're as large as a red tail. When they're flying, they're described as flying logs. They are very, very heavy birds, and they typically don't do a lot of soaring. There has to be a good wind for them to do much soaring at all. So again, kind of going back to the Cooper's hawks, these are the ones you're going to see in your backyard here in Tucson. If you feed birds in your backyard, if you put bird seed out for birds, you're also going to be feeding Cooper's hawks. That's just part of what you get when you feed birds here. So look how, so this is a male, adult male Cooper's hawk, and this is a juvenile female Cooper's hawk. So this is a pair that nested across the street from me. Look how big that bird is compared to this one. And what's also interesting, this bird threw me off because it has a white eyebrow. This bird looked very much like a goshawk to me. When I looked at it, I kept thinking, it's just an unusual individual. So there's going to be individuals out there that can throw you for a loop. There's actually a Cooper's hawk at Sweetwater Wetlands right now that looks more to me like a sharpshin than a Cooper's hawk. So there are going to be exceptions that you're going to come across like, wow, I don't know, this one just looks off. If I had seen this female up in the mountains, I probably would have called it a goshawk. So that would have been, I probably would have gotten wrong. The fact that it's nesting in Tucson with a male Cooper's hawk tells me it's probably not a goshawk. So this is a more typical juvenile Cooper's hawk. It's not going to have that eyebrow. So
Hey,
there's
Steve,
that.
before
Yes.
we move on, Patty's
Yeah.
just asking to clarify if sharpshins are found in Metro Tucson, in urban
Yes,
Tucson.
they're here right now. So they should be leaving right now, but they are here. I've seen them in Sweetwater the last couple of times I've been there, and I've never seen one at my house, but they are around. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Another thing about Cooper's hawks, which is kind of cool, is if you look at the one on the left, they're very vocal. A lot of times you'll hear them before you see them. They'll be screaming at this time of year. If you're walking around Tucson, you can hear them screaming. It's very neat to see. Again, this is a male that just landed after displaying to the female. So it's kind of unusual to see these flared coverts when they're perched, but there it is. And the sharp shin, they will never be that distinct or that noticeable. Okay. And again, if you look at this one, the wingtips or the wrists are a little bit forward, but they're still behind the head. They're still behind the head. So this is another thing that I caution people to use. You'll hear a lot about this now, is that, well, typically a Cooper's hawk will have a flat crown. They tend to hold the feathers on the top of their head down, but not always, okay? Sharp shins typically will have a very rounded head, but they can also pull them down. One thing that is a little bit different is kind of the location of the eye in relation to the bill. The eye is kind of lower on a Cooper's hawk. It's below the cere, the fleshy portion of the bill, where if you look at this eye, it's actually almost right in line with the top of the bill there. So, but I say be cautious with this because it depends on how they're holding their head and what your angle of view is. If you've got a good straight view like that, you can sort of see this. But again, I kind of caution it. It's not a great characteristic. But if you look, you can see that this crown, neck, and everything, there's really no break in that color like there is in a Cooper's hawk. Okay, then the larger falcons, the two we have here in Arizona are the peregrine and prairie falcons. Peregrine falcons are here year-round. They do breed up in the foothills. They are not courting yet, but they're getting close. A lot of times when you're walking up in the foothills, you'll see them calling. During migration in the winter, you can see them in flatter areas. You can see them a lot around water. They'll come down and hunt ducks and shorebirds. If you kind of look at these two individuals, what I talk about a peregrine is it has what I call a helmet. This mustache mark is very broad and very distinct. And peregrine falcons in general tend to look dark. They're a darker bird. Prairie falcons have what I call a pencil-shaped mustache. And this is the darkest prairie falcon I've ever seen. Typically, they're kind of more of a tan, buffy tan. Peregrine, when you see them flying, their whole underwing looks dark. So the fleshy portion, the patagium, and the flight feathers are all dark. The typical prairie falcon has what I call a dirty armpit and then light flight feathers. So prairie falcons tend to look very pale when you're seeing them flying out there. Peregrines tend to look very dark. They also fly a little bit differently. And again, you have to see a number of them before you start sensing this. Peregrine falcons fly with a much deeper wing beat. They use their whole wing when they're beating. Prairie falcons, I call it, they beat their wings with just the primaries. They're just using like the ends of their feathers to flap. It's not typically a real deep wing beat like a peregrine falcon. So when you see them, they do fly a little bit differently. Typically, they're going for birds, both of them. And then we have the smaller falcons. The American kestrel are found here year round. The merlins you're typically only going to find here in migration in winter. The odds of you finding one here in the summer are pretty slim. I always caution to say they're not here because when you say that, one shows up. Kestrels are fairly common year round here, more common in the winter. because some of the northern birds will migrate south. The males are very distinct. They have gray wings. The females will have brown wings. And they have what I call them two mustaches, but really only one mustache, maybe call those sideburns, whatever you want to call them. But the males and females both will have the two. Merlins oftentimes will have almost no mustache or very indistinct mustaches. So you can kind of see the mustache on this bird in flight. But this one up here, the mustache isn't very distinct. And a lot of times on the gray merlins, if you see a gray merlin, it almost has no mustache. Another thing that's kind of different about these two birds is how broad the wing is here in the secondary areas on a merlin. These are actually shaped more like a peregrine falcon than a kestrel. So this has a long, narrow wing. This has a shorter, broader wing. Merlins are, again, they're on a mission. When they're flying, they are going somewhere. They're not out leisurely for a flight. Kestrels are the kind of the exception as far as falcons go. They have a very buoyant flight. They get blown around in the wing or in the wind, and they hover. Most of the other falcons don't hover. And if they are, they're hovering into a very strong headwind. They don't hover in place. So kind of comparing a female kestrel to a male kestrel. Okay, the gray wings, the female doesn't have the gray. They can have a rusty tail on the male. Kestrels are real common. You'll see them, they'll sit on fences, fence lines, fence posts, and power lines. But they usually don't perch on telephone poles. Again, kind of another example of kestrels, really distinct mustache and sideburns. They will dive other birds. Merlins, prairie falcons, and peregrine falcons, if there's another raptor in the area, they're going to be diving. Kestrels do it from time to time, but they typically don't do this. Okay, eagles, we have two in Arizona, both breed in Arizona. Neither are very common in Tucson proper. Bald eagles are typically 90%, if not more, going to be found around water unless they're migrating. They typically feed on fish and or waterfowl. Golden eagles are typically not going to be found around water, and they're going to be found in open or mountainous areas. One thing, if you look at these two birds, look at the head in proportion to the body. Think about it. Look how small that golden eagle's head is. Look how big that bald eagle's head is. Look how massive that bald eagle's bill is. Look how relatively small the golden eagle's bill is. This is something you can use to distinguish these two birds in the field. Bald eagles are pretty distinctive. They've got this ginormous head. In flight, again, this big head of a bald eagle sticks way out in front where the smaller golden eagle's head. The golden eagle looks like it's built proportionally like it's supposed to. Bald eagles' heads look big. They stick out. On juvenile bald eagles, also something that's also kind of unique is the secondaries are broader. Sort of like I talked about with the Black Hawk. This area of the wing here, they're broader on the juvenile birds. As they get older, that wing will straighten out. Go to, I think the next one, I've got it. Okay, also on the juvenile birds, where the white is on the underwing is different. If you notice where the white is on the bald eagle, it's on this fleshy portion of the wing, the patagium. On a golden eagle, it's at the base of the primaries and secondaries. The patagium is dark. So again, very, very distinct. The tail of a bald eagle and a golden eagle can look like this. So ignore the tail if you're thinking you're looking at an eagle. But again, look how big this head is compared to the smaller head on a golden eagle. Very, very distinct. Look how broad these secondaries are on this juvenile bird. Again, they're very, very unique once you've seen a few of them. The other thing that you will see, not typically here in Arizona, if you go in their northern states, bald eagles will roost together where there's open water. So in winter, if you go to reservoirs that are partially frozen where the waterfowl are congregating in the middle, and you look at the surrounding trees, a lot of times you will see numerous bald eagles perched together. So again, there's another one of those exceptions to where raptors don't perch together. I've seen up to 50 bald eagles kind of perched in trees together. So very, very unique. So, and again, I'm going to talk about juvenile bald eagles. They're first year birds. They're all dark. They look very much like a golden eagle. Everything's dark. The second year, they do this weird white belly phase. And it almost looks like a Swainson's hawk. If you think about that dark head, dark bib, light belly, kind of looks like a Swainson's hawk. So then the third year, they start bolting more dark feathers in, and they start bolting more light feathers in. And then gradually the dark feathers on the body bolt in and the white feathers of the head bolt in. But it can take up to 5 to 7 years for the white head to become solid white. So a lot of times you'll see what looks like an adult bald eagle that has a dirty head. It's not a dirty head. It just still has some juvenile or immature feathers mixed in. Okay, vultures. I'm going to make one quick comment when I talk about vultures. Vultures are not, or wait, well, vultures and buzzards are not the same thing. Buzzards, people call buzzards, they'll say, hey, look, there's a buzzard. They're talking about a vulture. Buzzards are bootios. Buzzards are not vultures. Okay, I'll repeat that. Buzzards are not vultures. In this country, a lot of us here will call vultures buzzards. That's incorrect. In Europe and Africa, the buzzards are bootios. A common buzzard looks very much like our rough-legged hawk. Okay, there's your one takeaway from this. Buzzards aren't vultures. So in Arizona, we have two. We have turkey vultures and black vultures. Turkey vultures are abundant, especially in the summer, but they're here year round. Black vultures are less common, but they're certainly here. My experience in the Tucson area, in Tucson, what I call Tucson proper, I see turkey vultures. I do not see black vultures in what I call Tucson proper. And by that, I mean north of I-10 and west of I-10. So where I-10 goes north. So in east of I-10, I don't see black vultures. West of I-10 and south of I-10, I see black vultures. Now, that's not saying you won't see them here. It's just the odds are you're more likely to see turkey vultures in town. Turkey vultures fly with a distinct dihedral. Their wings are held up in a V pattern. They also have a much longer tail, and their heads are much smaller. So a lot of times when you're seeing soaring up there, you almost don't see their head. It almost looks like a soaring wing, where a black vulture's head sticks out much further and the tail is much shorter. They also have this distinct white base or white primaries, these outer primaries. Turkey vultures' wings are mostly dark. These primaries and secondaries can be paler if the sun's hitting them. Black vultures have black heads, always. Turkey vultures have red heads as an adult and black heads as immatures. black vulture or turkey vultures are almost exclusively carrion eaters. Black vultures are mostly carrion eaters, but they can kill and capture prey. It's just they don't do it if they don't have to. So turkey vultures have a wonderful sense of smell. They can sense carrion from great distances. So again, here's that lighter area under the wings that I talked about when you see them. Also, I'm just going to point something out. I'll talk about it again. I think it might be the next slide. But I kind of, as you look at this tail, it almost looks like it right at this where it ends. There's like a bulb sticking out. So this, it's almost like this outer tail feather is not perfectly straight. Okay. That'll be important when I think it's the next slide. Nope. One more slide coming. Black vultures and turkey vultures will both roost in large groups like this. Turkey vultures and black vultures will both sun themselves like that. It's believed they do it to warm themselves, also to dry the feathers, and it possibly kills some feather parasites. So again, I kind of want to talk about this bulb portion here. On a zone-tailed hawk, the tail looks very straight, and when they pull this tail in, it's very straight and square. The turkey vulture, even when the tail's pulled in, it's going to be somewhat like a light bulb. It's got a little bit of a bulb at the end of the tail. It's not real distinct, but it's there if you can see it. And we'll talk about the field trip in a little bit, but it's something you hopefully maybe we'll be able to see at the Tubac Hawk Watch if we go down. So black vultures typically fly with a very flat wing. California condors are not something we expect to see in southern Arizona, but I'm kind of surprised we haven't actually, because they are wandering around. One went as far as Wyoming back in I don't remember what year it was, either late 90s, maybe early 2000s. It went all the way across western Colorado up into Wyoming. So I'm actually kind of surprised we haven't had one come south. So it's just something to think about and be aware of. It could happen. I'd love for it to happen, but hadn't happened yet. If you see a condor, they're again very distinct. Black birds, huge white underwing feathers, very, very distinct. This is a courting pair. When they court, their heads get flush with color. Very, very cool to see. So right now, courting season's coming. So March and April, they'll be courting. So they're releasing them up in northern Arizona, up in the Vermilion Cliffs areas, and they're doing pretty well in northern Arizona and southern Utah, and they're reintroducing them in California. So they're actually doing pretty well. Again, I want to see one down here, so I keep looking, but it hadn't happened yet. So I'm going to speed up a little bit. Kites, we have two, white-tailed kite and Mississippi kites. Both are fairly unusual in southern Arizona, but they're here. Both should be found more around riparian areas. They kind of look like falcons, but they don't fly like falcons. And when you see them, you'll kind of know what they are. Very, very beautiful birds. Northern harriers, again, typically they're going to be flying really low with their wings held up and what it's called a dihedral in that V pattern. They have a white rump, again, very distinct on all. They used to be called marsh hawks. This is why. Very common around marshes and around water. Ospreys, again, not very likely to see one in Tucson proper, but there's been one hanging out at Canoa Ranch down south. So if you can get around water, you can find them. Again, once you see an osprey, you're not going to misidentify it. Very unusual. They fly with what their wing is, again, kind of that M pattern, M shape, double dihedral. It's held up at the wrist. They feed almost 99.9, if not more % of the time on fish. And then the crested caracara, typically, again, not found in Tucson proper, but found west of Tucson and south of Tucson. Very, very distinct. If you see them, you're not going to mistake that for anything else. Beautiful bird. Juveniles look, again, very much like an adult, but they're a brown version. So this is a northern raven diving one. So give you a size reference. Okay. So there is a field trip. I'm just going to talk about this really quickly. Tuesday, March 16th, you need to sign up on the website. I don't know if it's filled yet or not, but it is on Tucson Audubon's website. So at this time of year, the Blackhawks are coming through. They've seen them, I think, 5 out of the last 7 days. Zone tails are just starting. I don't think they've had Greyhawks yet. Lots of red tails coming through. Golden eagles are coming through. So these are directions there. Again, this information is going to be on Tucson Audubon's website, but those are the directions. And again, if you have questions, my email will be on here. Feel free to send me an email. Actually, I'll go back to that. Feel free to send me an email if you have questions, I think. All right, I'm going to bring this one up one more time about what do you see? Okay, we talk now that we've gone through them. What do you see? I see a long tail, short wings, and those white outer tail coverts. So what do we have? Yes, Cooper's hawk. Okay. Oops, I'm going to stop with that. All right, so I am going to stop share and go back to here. All right, then we can open for questions. And
all right, thank you so much, Steve. That was a wonderful presentation. So much to digest. I really appreciate it. I'm sure everyone here learned a lot. So before turning it over for any questions, just want to clarify a few points on the field trip. There are still spaces, not very many. So I recommend, if you haven't signed up yet, do so really quickly. If you find that it's full and you really want to go, just send me an email, and I'll see what I can do. So yeah, we don't want anyone to miss that. It's going to be a really awesome trip.
Actually, I'll mention one thing about that.
Mm-hmm.
It is a Hawkwatch International Hawkwatch site. They are there every day for the month of March, and they're counting raptors down there. They've got some of the best raptor guys in the country sitting there. So you can go any day you want. And yes, correct, it was Tuesday. I'm sorry, did I say Saturday? So yes, Tuesday the 16th.
Great point, Steve. Yeah, so don't just have to go with us, of course. Go more than once if you didn't get all of the hawks you wanted to see. But the Tucson Audubon trip is Tuesday, March 15th. That information's on our field trip page, as well as the registration link. I also thought that, as you mentioned before, Steve, you're willing to share your presentation. I would say the easiest thing, if you're willing to provide a PDF copy to me, I can just include it in the email that goes out to everyone with the recording. And that way you don't have to worry about answering too many folks who are looking for that. Yeah, so you can be aware of that. Right. Okay, let's open it up to some questions. We're just about noon. I want to respect everyone's time, but I think we can squeeze in a few questions if there's anything that Steve didn't answer in his fabulous presentation. Feel free to unmute yourself. No questions? Somehow don't believe there are no questions.
I do have a question. Steve,
Please.
you didn't mention much about the eye coloring of the birds, and I was just curious if that, I know you can't see that from a distance, but is that a helpful indicator?
Not really. Partially because is what we thought we knew about eye color wasn't right. I mean, typically, like in the accipiters, they go from typically a yellow eye to a ruby red eye. But what they're finding is that's not really, there's a lot of variation when it comes to that. So you can have a very old adult and it still won't have that ruby red eye. So the eye color does change in most of the raptors as they age, but it's not a very good thing to use for identification. Yeah, but the Cooper's hawk was the one that most people used it for, and that actually just got shot down in recent years.
Thanks for clarifying that, because I know I've heard that as an ID trick as well, so that's really helpful. Any other questions on Raptor ID? Anything from the presentation you want clarified, or?
And I'm open to, if you have a photo or a question, don't hesitate to drop me an email and we can look at it and see if we can figure it out, even if it's not a North American bird, right, Don? Don Emerson had a photograph of a bird, and I was like, it's not a North American bird, and I was just really stumped, but finally did figure out what it was.
Awesome. Thanks for offering that, Steve. That's a wonderful resource, and I'll make sure to include Steve's email on the email I send out to everyone with those resources. Okay, if there are no more questions at this time, I'll go ahead and wrap it up. I want to say a huge thank you to Steve Vaughan, our presenter today. That was a fabulous presentation. I'm sure we could all listen to him speak about raptors for many more hours, but we're grateful for his time. And thank you all for joining us, spending your afternoon with us, afternoon, morning, whatever it is. And we hope you'll join us for another event or the Hawk Watch next week. Thank you so much and have a good day, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.